Clash Royale has over 100 cards, but there are still many mechanics and ideas left completely untapped. For a game that's been out this long, you'd think it's done everything. But most cards still follow the same patterns. Meanwhile, the community is coming up with completely new concepts. So today we're going through some of the most interesting card concepts and seeing which ones could work and which ones would absolutely break the game. So let's go. Gollum Spider. The first concept is the Gollum Spider. It costs 5 Elixir, and instead of attacking normally, it attaches itself to an enemy troop. That troop keeps doing whatever it was doing, but it can't actually target the spider. While it's attached, the spider slowly deals damage, and once the troop dies, it spawns a full Gollum. Now, the idea itself is actually really interesting. A troop that latches onto another unit and deals damage over time is something Clash Royale has never really explored before. But the problem is the lack of counterplay. Once it connects, there's not really much you can do to stop it, especially if it's on something like a tank, and turning that into a full Gollum afterward just feels way too rewarding for a 5 Elixir card. I think the core mechanic is great, but let's be honest, the payoff is way too extreme. Maybe instead of spawning a full Gollum, it could split into smaller units or just deal a burst of damage when the troop dies. Log Spirit. The next concept might actually be a viable card, the Log Spirit. It's basically a spirit shaped like a log. Instead of instantly rolling across the arena, it runs forward like a normal spirit until it finds a target, then activates. The damage would be lower than the regular log, but still enough to take out things like skeletons and goblins. So instead of being a spell, it plays more like an electro spirit, but with a focus on clearing swarms. And honestly, this could fit into the game pretty well. It adds a bit more counterplay compared to the normal log, since it has to travel and can be stopped, but in return, it gives you a cheap, cycle-friendly way to deal with small units. If anything, the main question is whether it overlaps too much with cards like Electro Spirit or Fire Spirit, but as a concept, this actually feels balanced and realistic, and maybe it could be the first 1 Elixir legendary card. Mega Knight Dragon. Next up is the Mega Knight Dragon, and yeah, it sounds terrifying because it kinda is. It basically takes everything you know about Mega Knight and puts it in the air. It would still have the spawn damage, but now it can hit flying troops as well, and instead of jumping toward enemies, it would just drop down onto them to deal damage. The idea itself is pretty straightforward, but that's also the problem. Mega Knight is already strong because of how much value it gets on defense, and giving that same kind of impact to a flying unit just makes it way harder to deal with. A lot of the usual counters just wouldn't work the same way anymore. It's a cool concept visually, but in terms of gameplay, it'd probably be way too oppressive unless you heavily tone down the damage or increase the cost to like 10 Elixir. Log Giant. Earlier we talked about the Log Spirit, but what if you took that idea even further? This is the Log Giant. At its core, it works like a normal giant, it targets buildings and costs 7 Elixir, but the extra cost comes from that log part. Instead of being completely passive against troops, it periodically throws out logs. Every few seconds it sends a log forward that behaves just like the real one. Same damage, same range, even the knockback. So it's basically a giant that can control ground swarms while still pushing toward the tower, kind of like a bowler strapped onto a tank, and honestly, this is one of those concepts that sounds fun, but could get out of control really quickly. Giving a win condition built-in crowd control like that makes it way harder to defend efficiently, especially for swarm-heavy decks. You're not just dealing with a tank anymore, you're constantly getting pushed back at the same time. I think the idea is creative, but you'd probably have to tone it down a lot. Maybe weaker logs or simply longer intervals, because as it is right now, this would be incredibly hard to stop. Evo Spear Goblins. But why limit ourselves to just regular cards? This one is actually an evolution concept. Evo Spear Goblins. It's a pretty simple idea, but really effective. After a 2-card cycle, they gain a new ability. Their spear turns into fire spears that deal area damage. So instead of struggling into swarms, they can actually suddenly handle groups much more reliably. And honestly, this makes a lot of sense. Spear Goblins have always been more about ship damage and spacing, but they fall apart against multiple units. This evolution directly fixes that weakness without completely changing how the card works. The only concern is how efficient it becomes for the cost. If the splash damage is too strong, it could start replacing other cheap swarm counters like Bomber or Firecracker entirely. But compared to some of the other concepts, this actually feels realistic. It keeps the identity of the card, just pushes it a little bit further. Sparky Hut. Something a whole lot less realistic is the Sparky Hut. And yeah, it does exactly what you think. It spawns Sparkies. Well, kind of. Instead of full ones, it spawns 2 mini Sparkies every 20 seconds. These have about half the damage of a regular Sparky and half the HP as well, so they're weaker but still threatening if you ignore them. And even with that balancing, this is still pretty crazy. Spawning units that can deal that much splash damage from a building would be really hard to deal with, especially in longer matches where it keeps stacking value. It actually feels similar to one of the modifiers given to the zappies in the Chaos game mode. I think it's a fun idea, but not something that would ever realistically fit into normal gameplay, because even toned down, a building that just keeps producing Sparkies sounds like a nightmare to defend. Hero Pekka. Next up is the Hero Pekka. This one has a really unique ability. It can attach a butterfly to any enemy troop, and once that happens, the Pekka will lock onto that target no matter what. So in theory, you could redirect it, pull it backwards, or even force it to the other lane just by choosing the right target. And honestly, I really like this idea. It adds a level of control that we've never really seen before, especially for a unit like Pekka that's usually very predictable. The problem is how you actually use it. If it requires you to tap a specific enemy troop, that starts to get pretty complicated for Clash Royale. The game is designed to be quick and simple, and something like this might be too clunky in real gameplay. Champions and heroes already were quite the innovation having to tap for an ability, but it wasn't more than just tapping it. So the concept itself is great, but realistically it's probably a bit too complex to ever be added. Mega Gollum. Now this next one is genuinely one of the craziest concepts I have ever seen. The Mega Gollum. It's a 20 Elixir card, which of course raises the question, how would that even work when you can only hold 10 Elixir? Well, instead of placing it all at once, you build it in parts. Each piece costs 4 Elixir. First the legs, then the torso, then the arms, until the full unit is complete. But here's the catch. While you're placing those parts, it doesn't actually do anything. So similar to something like an Elixir collector, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage in the moment, hoping to get a massive payoff later. And honestly, that risk-reward idea is really interesting. But 20 Elixir worth of investment for one unit would have to be insanely strong to be worth it, and that's where it could easily become impossible to balance, because either it's too weak and no one ever uses it, or it's strong enough to justify the cost and then it just becomes completely overwhelming once it's built. It's a super creative idea, don't get me wrong, probably way too extreme to ever work in a real match though. I do think the idea might be worth considering, just not with 20 whole Elixir. It's like the Exodia of Clash Royale. Penguins. Alright, this next one is a lot cuter. Penguins. You get 4 of them for 4 Elixir, but they come with a unique ability. For 1 extra Elixir, they can slide on their bellies, giving them a burst of speed and dealing damage as they move. And after they slide, they actually gear up, which lets them deal better with tankier units. On top of that, they're completely immune to any freeze or slowing effects. There's a lot going on here, but it's actually a really fun concept. The ability adds some skill expression, deciding when to activate it for pressure or value, and the freeze immunity gives them a clear niche. The only concern is that it might be doing a bit too much for the cost. Speed, damage, scaling, and immunity all in one card could make it very hard to balance. But as an idea, this is definitely one of the more creative ones. Evo Zappies. The next one is another evolution, Evo Zappies. This one adds a gem in between the Zappies that charges up and deals damage when enemies get too close. So instead of struggling against melee units that can just walk up and take them out, they now have a built-in way to punish anything that gets close. And that actually fixes one of their biggest weaknesses. The interesting part is that the gem could work in a lot of different ways. It could be constant damage, a burst after charging, or even something like a stun effect. The flexibility makes the concept really interesting, but also harder to balance, because depending on how strong that gem is, it could either feel like a nice upgrade or make them way too oppressive on defense. Still, as an evolution though, this feels like a pretty cool idea. Grand Warden. People were asking for the Archer Queen for years, and we finally got her in 2021, but she's not the only hero from Clash of Clans. This is the Grand Warden, and just like in Clash of Clans, the idea revolves around his support ability. He would be a ranged unit with a 3 Elixir ability that grants invisibility to all troops in his radius for a short time. And yeah, That already sounds really strong. We've kind of seen something similar before with limited time cards like the Super Knight that could make everything around him invisible, and he was completely broken, mainly because the effect was always active and you didn't have to think about when to use it. This version though at least adds some decision making with the 3 Elixir ability, which helps a lot. But even then, invincibility is one of the most powerful mechanics you can have in Clash Royale. Being able to completely ignore damage, even for a moment, can flip entire interactions instantly. So even with that 3 Elixir cost, it might still be too strong. You'd probably have to make the duration very short, or tone down the effect somehow, maybe a damage reduction instead of full invincibility, just to keep it from completely shutting down pushes and defenses. It is a really cool idea though, and it makes perfect sense since it's based on an existing Clash of Clans hero, but in Clash Royale, this would be incredibly difficult to balance. Ice Hound. The Ice Hound is basically what you'd expect, a lava hound, but made of ice. Instead of spawning lava pups when it dies, it would create a snow blizzard, similar to something like the Ice Golem effect, slowing everything down in that area. You could even take it a step further and have it constantly slow nearby troops while it's flying, giving it more of a support role during pushes, and honestly, that's a pretty cool twist. It turns the Hound from a pure tank into something that also controls the pace of the fight, which could open up some really interesting strategies. But the main issue is that it overlaps a lot with Lava Hound. At its core, it's still the same idea, a flying tank that pops into something after death, just with a different effect. And Clash Royale usually tries to avoid adding cards that feel too similar. That said though, this actually feels perfect for an evolution. Instead of being a completely new card, turning the Lava Hound into an ice version with a slowing effect would make way more sense, and would give it a fresh role without replacing it entirely. Net Rocket. The Net Rocket is basically a twist on the normal rocket. Instead of dealing massive damage, it traps troops in a large area, kinda like the evolved Hunter's Net. Any units caught inside would be stuck in place until the net is broken, and compared to something like Vines, this would be on a completely different level. Vines only affect a few targets and don't last for very long, but this could potentially lock down an entire push if it hits enough value. That's what makes it interesting, but also a really dangerous card for balance. A very large area, long duration stun that could completely shut down pushes with very little counterplay, especially if your opponent doesn't have a quick way to break the net. You'd probably need to heavily limit either the duration or the area or how much damage the net can take, because as a concept it is really creative, but in practice this could very easily become one of the most frustrating cards to play against. Evo Berserker. Evo Berserker is a bit of an interesting one. It gives her a ranged attack that charges up, allowing her to attack faster over time, kinda like the Little Prince, and that alone already changes a lot. Berserker is usually limited to having to get up close, but giving her range suddenly makes her way more versatile. She can apply pressure from a distance and even start functioning as a bit of an air defense, and that is a huge upgrade. The question is whether it becomes too much. If she keeps her strong close range damage and gains a scaling ranged attack, she could start replacing multiple roles at once, which is always dangerous for balance, especially considering she already has a solid amount of HP for only 2 Elixir. So the idea itself is really cool, but you'd probably need to tone down one side of her kit to keep it fair. Still, as an evolution, it feels like a really cool upgrade, but maybe it would lose its identity too much. Elixir Shark. The Elixir Shark might be one of the coolest ideas I have ever seen. Every Clash Royale arena has a river, and since 2016, people have been asking, nay, begging, for some kind of water-based card. This is a really clever way to actually use that space. The Elixir Shark would swim back and forth along the river, collecting the souls of any troops that die, similar to the Skeleton King. And once it fills up its bar, it can spawn weaker versions of these troops. What makes it even more interesting is that it can copy both your troops and your opponents, which opens up a lot of unpredictable situations. And honestly, this is one of those concepts that feels genuinely fresh. It adds a completely new layer to the game without interfering too much with the core mechanics, since it's limited to the river. The only concern is how consistent or fair it would feel. If it gets too much value from just existing, it would become really annoying to play against. But overall, this is one of the few concepts that actually feels like it could bring something entirely new to Clash Royale. Maybe it would become a new type of card, not a building, spell, or troop, but something like a water card. Not sure. Master Builder. Now I want to talk about the Master Builder. So he's originally from Clash of Clans, but in a way, he's already in Clash Royale through modes like Merge Tactics. If he were added to the main game though, his role would be really interesting. Instead of being a traditional damage dealer, he could upgrade your buildings to make them stronger. Think of something like turning a cannon into a stronger version, similar to a double cannon, but it wouldn't stop there. He could also build his own mech and become a damage dealer himself, which gives him a second role during a match. And if you wanted to take it even further as a champion, you could give him his ability using his electric hammer, maybe a temporary boost or instant upgrade effect. There's a lot going on here, but it actually fits his character really well. The main concern is how complicated it becomes. Upgrading buildings, spawning units, and having an ability might be too much for one card. But as a concept, this feels like something Clash Royale could genuinely explore, especially as a champion. So let me know which one of these concepts you would like to see in the game, and if there's more you'd like to see, then click this video on screen, and I'll see you there.